Good afternoon, dear colleagues. I hope that you're doing well, and I'm really sorry that I couldn't make it and be with you in Las Vegas. I had some issues with the COVID, and absolutely all my family members were involved since 3 weeks. That's why I had to cancel my trip. And since yesterday, I'm also in. So first of all, I will try to give my lectures with a small help of an oxygen source, just to have the possibility to spend this 45 minutes without any trouble. Anyway, I really want to thank for this kind invitation Dr. Sami Numbisi, who is a close friend and a warrior in the field of quality, safe implantology. Also thank his organizing committee, and also my friend, Dr. Dirk Dudek, who will share with me this 1-hour lecture talking about quality assessment and clean surfaces. We are going to talk about osseointegration, the osseointegration phenomenon, how it works. But also, we will talk about the problems or the issues who will come to its loss. We call that peri-implantitis. And we will discuss absolutely all the etiology and how we can avoid the consequences of peri-implantitis. In this lecture, I will take some references, and it's one of the biggest ones today. 2 of them are passed away, Professor Albrechtson and Professor Sami Sandhaus. We will have some informations quite old in the beginning of implantology from my mentor, Professor Bronnemark. And then we have some results of research done with Professor Thomas Albrechtson, who is the one who published the first papers on osseointegration. And then I would like to thank once more Dr. Sami Numbisi for the magic moments we spent in 2016 in Miami with Professor Sami Sandhaus. But we will try to use what they teach us and to see what we can have, or what are the message we can take home from the basic and the actual researchers.
Titanium is a very peculiar material. Depending on the composition of the bulk, which has to be as pure as possible, how the oxide is formed on its surface, which is an inevitable event. The special phenomenon of osseointegration is that down at the nano level, titanium and bone and marrow unite. They unite, and you can't break it without using violence. So the titanium, in fact, then functions as an anchor for an incorporated non-biologic component in the human body. And it's recognized by the ordinary rejection capacity as acceptable.
Here we are talking about a clean implant surface. pure titanium, good products. And we really today, we really can trust on titanium as a biomaterial who can succeed to integrate in bone. And you can see here the bone to implant contacts, the values are between 50 and 80%, which is a very, very interesting values. And we can, but also by using those kind of very interesting tools like the micro CT scans, we can really see that in different kind of bones, type 1 and type 4 bone, you can easily see that by cutting the images that the bone is really sticking to the implants. So we have absolutely all the tools to evaluate the quality and the quantity of bone around implants.
At this time, there are 100 million edentulous in Europe, and in other parts of the world, there are almost billions. So it's a terrible number. And how could one combine this with using patterns? The fact is that we here are facing a philosophical problem. Patents, money, and then who should get it? And this means that I feel that we have come to a situation where it is possible to avoid the money control. We should also be critical, and therefore I suggest that we really, very honestly, report not only success, but also problems and failures.
You can easily see here that we saw Professor Brandmark in different periods, and you can see easily that at the end of his life, he was talking about failures and problems and how to handle it. In the first European workshop of periodontology in Nijmegen, the definition given to peri-implantitis, it's a deeper mucous and osseous destruction leading to partial loss of osseointegration, which can lead to implant loss. The best thing sometimes is to remove the implant and to place another one in better conditions. For the mucositis, it's a reversible pathology who can be solved quite easily by soft or at least hard tissue rehabilitation. When it comes to epidemiology, this is one of the most interesting papers. I read this last year. So it's publication from 1980 to 2017 on 9 different databases. 111 putative risk factors were studied. 12 studies were selected with a different 8 different thresholds between 6.6% to 36% of the risk of peri-implantitis. In Sweden, it seems that it reached 45% in 2016. The statement from the Estonia consensus meeting on peri-implantitis showed that there is a lot of factors related to the implant, what we are going to discuss more today, related to the clinician, surgical and prosthetic experience, skills and ethics, and the patient factors, which are systemic disease, medication, oral disease, oral hygiene, and smoking. The implant factors for me is the heart of my presentation and is the subject who is less known by our colleagues, dentists and implantologists, because it's a mix between basic research and clinical outcomes. And I will try reasonably and honestly to summarize the most important things to you and try to make you feel that implant surface quality could be not only a limited evidence in risk indicators for peri-implant disease, but a substantial evidence. Most of the time, because we cannot prove that this implant surface quality is the reason, it's more easy to talk about bacteria, about overload, about those classical etiological problems than for implant surface quality, because the dentist is not well equipped to see this kind of problem. Another view on the etiology, one of the reasons leading to a dramatic peri-implantitis problem is the difference in the anatomy. Comparing tooth and implants. The other thing is the microbiology. We have a different kind of bacteria involved in peri-implantitis comparing to periodontitis, which is a pathology we know better. Biomechanics, which is everything related to overload. What I will focus in today is the physical and chemical aspects, the quality of the material, the corrosion problems, which are the most unknown situations and problems. Back to Professor Brownmark, who was saying that it can be difficult to distinguish facts from fictions when it comes to implant surfaces and their impact in the peri-implantitis process. What we can really say that is more clean, the cleaner, purer the biomaterial surface is, and we're talking about titanium, but also about zirconia, and we will discuss this topic later on. More bigger it's the surface energy, more important is the biomolecular absorption, and the more favorable is cells adhesion. The problem is that with naked eyes, a dirty implant or contaminated implant cannot be seen. And by using the microscope, by using different physical and chemical tools, we can say today that the contaminants are the real problem with regards to osseointegration. We know today that osseointegration is related to the oxide on the top of the bulk titanium and the oxide on the top of the zirconia implant. The contaminants will be a real barrier between this titanium oxide and the hydroxyl groups of glycoproteins, which are the first link between a living tissue and the foreign body, which is the implant. In a macroscopic level, these are some of the slides borrowed from my friend, Dr. Dirk Dudek. Sometimes it's really dramatic. We do not need to go in a high magnification to see that the surface is really contaminated. And we can really see this kind of implant were analyzed coming from as received box and ready to be sold to dentists. The contamination during the manufacturing is a huge problem. You will have absolutely all the details later on with Dr. Dirk Dudek, who is the head and the director of Clean Implant Foundation, and he will give you absolutely all the details and absolutely all the catastrophic results we can find in implants sold in all the markets around the world. It's not only a titanium problem, it's also a zirconia problem, and this is some of the examples. What we can say is that one single layer of contaminant is sufficient to enable the use of a biomaterial. It means that if you have a biomaterial made in titanium or zirconia, if it is contaminated, it means that it's exactly the same than an iron implant or a cobalt implant or whatever. So you can see here on the right side that the difference in the atomic composition at the implant surface when it's contaminated and when it's clean. When it's contaminated, we have around 9% of titanium in the extreme surface, and when it is contaminated, it's less than 1%. The oxygen will be 40% for a clean implant and less than 20% of a contaminated one. And for sure, the carbon, which is related to the contamination, biologic contamination, organic contamination, will be more than 70% on a contaminated implant versus 48% on a clean implant. But on a clean implant, it will be the carbon existing in the air when you open your implant. The material to study all those things is very, very complicated. It's here it's an XPS machine. Dr. Dirk de Dijk will show the ADS1. It's quite the same. It will give you the structure or the atomical composition on the top, the extreme surface of the implant. And then you can see by doing a profile to see what happened with this titanium oxide coating. How deep is the coating? How deep is the different structures of this oxide who are responsible of osseointegration? And you can see here in this how extraordinary is this kind of tools. We can really in here cut in inside the oxide to see which kind of oxide is it. Is it TeO, TiO2, Ti2O3? Those different kind of oxide will have different roles in osseointegration. But unfortunately, in contaminated implant, we can find silicon, carbon, Teflon. We will review all that with the lecture on clean implant foundation. And the worst thing is to have this kind of molecules, hydrocarbons, hydroxyl, carboxyl, which are remnants from cooling oil used to turn titanium implants. It means that this the passivation of this oil was absolutely not efficient during all the manufacturing of the implant and the surface treatment, and we can find all those things at the end on the implant ready to be used for our patient. The microstructure is also very important, and we can say that titanium implant exposed to organic contaminants, and this is what Ong and co-workers explained in 1992. When this organic contaminant during the manufacturing process or clinically due to bacteria and inflammatory tissue needs a difficult treatment before any kind of regenerative therapy. This is what we can say on an implant. This is 500 times, and this is 3,000 times. So when you are working clinically, you will never know if your implant is clean enough. When you open a bag, you can never know with naked eyes if your implant is a good one, a really clean and non-contaminated one. We did a lot of work. I personally worked for 20 years looking for a solution for peri-implantitis, but before I studied during my PhD thesis, I studied the osseointegration phenomenon and also all the possibilities presented or published in papers to clean up those implants. So, for example, acids, remnants from acid etching when they are not totally passivated, those acids either used as a peri-implantitis treatment, like citric acid proposed by different authors, or for surface treatment during the manufacturing for SLA implant, for example. This acid The titanium implant is an amphoteria. If you give him an acid, he will react as a base. If you give him a base, he will react as an acid. It means that the reaction between the acid and the titanium oxide is a very strong one. And to pacify an implant treated with acid to have this rugosity need a very complicated protocol to be totally pacivated. And this is the major problem when it comes to a small, I mean, not a small brands, the brands who do not take all the precautions and take all the, and put a lot of effort to clean up and to passivate the implant. The microabrasion, which is something proposed by many authors to clean up the implant, and then you can clean. If you don't need to regenerate, you can clean without any problem. But when we studied during this, to publish this paper, we can see that these sodium atoms are incorporated inside the titanium oxide. It means that instead of cleaning, you contaminate the surface, and we can find it deep inside the oxide, some atoms which are not to be positive or interesting for osseointegration. So this now titanium brushes. Many colleagues describe that they use it and it's succeeding and this and that. And you can see easily that this titanium brush, it's exactly like when the implant brand do not use a good drills to turn the implant, or they do not change those drills frequently. And then you have this kind of traces you see here on the microscopy, this kind of traces who will give this kind of small scratches on the implant surface. And especially those kind of scratches are not totally passive. It will really hurt. In another view, we can also talk about the guided implant systems, where you can see here that those guided implant systems, sorry for the sound, I am trying to correct it, but you can see here that on the right side, when you put an implant with those titanium sleeves, you will also have scratches comparing to those external guiding systems who will permit to place the implant without having any contact between the implant and the guide. How does it work when we are on a very regular surfaces, and the best ones present an SA of 1.2 and the area of around 2 microns. Those osteogenic cells will start to rebuild bone on a regular surface, when on a surface which is not presenting a huge defects or a huge valley craters, where everything is quite the same. The cells will go and evaluate on this surface to build bone, to put this collagen matrix before having a new bone. But when we have scratches, we will have an electric field when you will have attractive and repulsive signs, and then those cells who will rebuild bone, like what you see here, going from the bone and walking on this implant surface to regenerate and to fill the gap done by the drilling. This is a very, very interesting histology showing that the differentiation of pre-osteoblast is done on the surface. when you have this kind of scratches, or when you see this kind of cracks, like what we will discuss with Dr. Dudek later on, we will have this kind of holes or scratches, and the cells will start to grow on a flat surface, on a kind of regular surface. And then at the end, when they will reach this kind of scratches or holes, they will stop, because there is an electric cloud all around. And this electric cloud will be sometimes antagonists with the electric field generated by those cells. Those cells will stop. And at the time those cells stop, a lot of signals, a lot of mediators will be sent to different cells, like macrophages, giant cells, and especially osteoclastic cells. And those cells, instead of building bone, they will start to destroy it. And the fact is that those osteoclastic cells will work on an acidic environment, and they will even not stop building bone, but they will lead to a dissolution of the collagen of the existing bone. You can see in this very interesting paper published by Gallo and co-workers, showing that on these surface scratches, you see here in the middle, here the surface scratches here will lead to a problem and stop the osteogenic properties of the cells. So what about peri-implantitis treatment? Now we have an idea about how it works biologically. What can we do with those surfaces? Now we clean up everything, the tissue. We can do it with lasers, with different things. Many things were described, and here we can, in the beginning, decide. While the ultimate goal of peri-implantitis treatment is to regenerate the lost bone around the implant, and for that bone to reintegrate the implant surface. So it means that we need to rebuild the implant surface to make it interesting for the bone with titanium oxide, good enough for a reosseointegration. Or another modest goal of arresting the disease, and it would be a welcome outcome anyway. We have two possibilities if you want to treat a peri-implantitis: the resective surgery, complete elimination of periodontal peri-implant pocket and contaminated titanium surface, or peri-implant regenerative surgery. The problem here with the resective surgery, it can be interesting, but it's non-aesthetic, absolutely non-aesthetic. And the problem is that we will have a huge amount of titanium debris, and those metallic contamination are exactly what this kind of Congress try to work and eliminate from the field of implantology. The peri-implant regenerative surgery, we have a lot, hundreds of papers showing how to do that, but most of them say that no evidence that so-called regenerative procedures had additional beneficial outcome. Other authors, complete field of bony defect caused by peri-implantitis using GBR protocol membrane and bone graft substitute does not seem to be predictable outcome. When we can see here in those papers, reosseointegration 14%, 20%, and the conclusion is that the osseointegration appears to be difficult to achieve. Another papers, 12% of reosseointegration. So the conclusion is that the reosseointegration is difficult, impossible, maybe related to the long distance, but it's not a real argument. The treatment recommendation for implant infection, that no gold standard, no evidence-based modalities. All those conclusions are desperately published by a lot of honest authors. We tried a lot of things. We published a very interesting paper where we tried to reestablish the anatomical composition in vitro, and we succeed in vitro. I must say in vitro. We are using laser to burn all the remnants, for sure the laser with a very secure settings. And then we are using acid to remove the remnants from the surface. We're using citric acid. And as concluded in the previous articles, we will rinse for 2 minutes to passivate the surface. And then we will use the peroxide, H2O2, to rebuild the titanium oxide. So very interesting. You can see here that for the contaminated surface, we move from 1.29% of titanium to 9% to 11.8%, and from oxygen from 21 to 43. It means that it works, this technique works in vitro. We evaluate absolutely all those things for the sterilization and publish that on, give lectures in Peri on different meetings. We also did a semi-in vivo surgery to see how it works in the rabbit tibia, and we have quite interesting results. We also do some research on the rat abdominal wall to see the inflammation, and you can see that our protocol here, the blue one is the same as the purple one, which is a clean cover screw, clean and contaminated cover screw treated with our protocol. And at the end, we did a real dog study with the group of Jan Linde and Thor Berglund in Gothenburg. And we do it in 2 different surfaces, a polished one and SLA one. We put an artificial ligatures to create the peri-implantitis, and then we give it recycling to the dogs. And we really saw that in different protocols of treatment, we don't have any. You can see here that you have a pseudoarthrosis and no osseointegration. And in another cases with our protocol, we succeed to have a real reosseointegration. And the dark bone you can see close to the surface is the new bone regenerated after the proposed treatment. And you can see here that with the smooth and rough implant is quite the same. And we were really happy. So we ended all that by publishing a paper with Thomas Albrechtson on implant surfaces, microstructure, and physical chemical aspects. Why? Because even when we succeeded with those results, we saw that it's quite impossible to rehabilitate anatomic composition of a contaminated implant to rebuild bone in a proper way on it. So after 20 years, we can just say that if the ailing implant is particularly in strategic position, and if the active peri-implantitis do not involve more than half of its surface, try treatment. If you have a direct access to the exposed contaminated surface, you can try the protocol we published, because he's well documented, but we are not really satisfied by the clinical results and their reproducibility. But if you are facing a progressive peri-implantitis, you just remove the implant. What you can see in those 2 movies, and then you rebuild absolutely all the tissues, the hard and soft tissue, and put an implant in a better way. So to explain all that, we need to understand how osseointegration works. And this is, for me, the most important part of my lecture. One of the more interesting definitions of biocompatibility is that the materials exploitation of host proteins and cells so as to get a maximum specific tissue response. It means that the biomaterials will use the body to stay in without any problem. But if we ask you how to explain easily the osseointegration phenomenon, what really happens at the atomical level, few tenths of nanometers of this so famous titanium oxide glycoproteins interface, we can answer that titanium oxide surface offers the ideal substrate to calcium and phosphor of the bone to be formed through specific chemical exchange processes. We can also say that titanium oxide will permit, by his high purity and wettability, an early adhesion of osteoblasts. But what else? One of the most interesting explanation is what I will detail with you right now, and please concentrate with me because it's very important. One of the sound reasons explaining the exceptional biocompatibility of titanium and osseointegration could be that titanium oxide can pacify tissue-destroying agent immediately after surgical trauma. It means that those destruction agent will destroy the bone around the implant, any kind of implant, if it's not titanium or zirconia, and have a pseudoarthrosis around this implant. Those agents are pacified by titanium oxide. How does it work? The first cells coming in a surgical few minutes is the neutrophils, the PMNs. They will come on the foreign body to see, searching for bacteria. Those granulocytes or PMNs produce peroxide as a first natural defense against viruses and pathogens. And you can see here, this is a very interesting papers published by Buddy Ratner and co-workers showing how it works from the insertion of the biomaterials to the collagenous encapsulation, which can lead to a pseudoarthrosis and failing of this implant. Is that the first are the neutrophils, and then they will produce peroxide. And then after the production of this peroxide, if there is bacteria, the macrophages and giant cells will come. Macrophages, they fuse to be giant cells. So if macrophages are present, they will move to be giant cells, and then we will have an encapsulation of the cadavers of those bacteria. But when you have a sterile implant, but not in titanium, you will have exactly the same thing, because this peroxide will set those radical oxygen species, which will kill some of the cells around the implant. And this will have exactly the same outcome. It will kill the macrophages and the giant cells. But why, when we have a titanium, we don't have any encapsulation, any pseudoarthrosis? And this is what I want you to follow with me. When the peroxide is produced, it will set free what we call a free oxygen radicals or radical oxygen species. And those are a majority superoxide radicals, O2, 2 minus, 2 minus, which are the origin of the those hydroxyl group, which is OH point, the killers of cells, the killers of bacteria, the killers of viruses. And the problem is that every time we have a foreign material inside the body, the PMN will set free this kind of radical species, oxygen radical species, and those are responsible of the what we call the fibroblastic path. It will go from the mesenchymal cells to fibroblasts and fibrocytes, and we'll have the pseudoarthrosis. But with titanium, we will have, even if we place the implant in titanium or zirconia, because it's exactly the same, at the time you have an oxygen on the top of this implant, you will have an incorporation of those radicals inside the titanium oxide. And this is what we published with Professor Albrechtson in 2009, 2012. And then at this time, no message will be sent to macrophages and giant cells, and no pseudoarthrosis or encapsulation will happen. This is one of the most interesting papers explaining the foreign body reaction published by Thomas Albrechtson and co-workers. And this is another extremely interesting paper published by my friend from Tel Aviv, Eitan Michelinsky, where he studies the quantity of ROS in the inflammatory environment during the peri-implantitis, and he finds a lot of oxygen species, radical oxygen species, when it comes to peri-implantitis problem. So the last part of my presentation is a disturbing story, which is a corrosion of titanium. We all think that titanium is the best metal to use in the body. Sorry, I start to be a little bit tired, and small fever is coming, but I still have 10 minutes. I can make it. So sorry for that. I lost my words, and really sorry. I'm not in my best mood. Anyway, biomechanics and corrosion is my last part of my presentation, and is one of the most disturbing, as I said, most disturbing ones. Titanium is the best, is the worst with regards to thermodynamic potentials, is the worst one comparing to gold, platinum, silver, and other noble metals. When it comes to electrochemistry, titanium follow the red line, became interesting. But when we are in a living body with enzymes, organic molecules, bacteria, the titanium became the best. And for sure, when you say titanium, because of its titanium oxide, we can say exactly the same about zirconia. This is a kind of proof that titanium, you can see here that this is a chrome cobalt crown on a titanium abutment. And you can see that the titanium abutment is clean, and the chrome cobalt under the ceramic is totally corroded. How does it work? For iron, for example, you have these oxygen species will come and egress the iron surface, and you will have some atoms detached from the bulk, and those will be linked to cells and start an immune reaction. For titanium, it's not a problem. You don't have, due to the titanium oxide, you don't have, or for zirconia, due to zirconia oxide, you will not have any problem, except, and this is very important, except when your titanium or zirconia is contaminated, it became absolutely like an iron implant. You have to be really convinced that contaminated titanium is like an iron implant. or like a copper implant or whatever of those non-noble metals. That's why we need really to avoid any kind of contamination on the implant surface. This is supported by papers from Duchesne and co-workers showing that organic contaminant will speed up the reaction of titanium dissolution. This titanium dissolution will bring titanium to titanium 4 plus and 4 electrons. It means that the titanium oxide on the upper part of the implant will permit a desorption of titanium atoms from inside and through the titanium oxide. And at the time titanium will goes out, you can have some other carbon or other atoms coming in. And this is what we call corrosion. We published this paper because it was at that time, it was in 1997, rejected by all our implantology journals. What are you talking about? We're talking about corrosion. 1997, it was the golden age of implantology. They don't want to hear something else than titanium is the best. So I had to publish this paper in the International Journal of PIXE, which is a pure physics journal with a high impact factor. So I was lucky at that time. I was doing my PhD thesis. I had some more coins in my academic pocket. I presented that in a Quintessence Publishing in Tokyo Congress, in the Congress of Tissue Integration, all the results of those studies. And it's very interesting because we find those, some of the implants came in from a very big brands showing corrosion, like you can see on the left side. And when we study that in a very high magnification, 5,000, we can see pits of corrosion on the implant surface. And when we did the XPS measurement, we just can see carbon, no traces of titanium, and the very weak amount of oxygen. So we decided to do a study and to put those implants on the rabbit tibia, and it was pure titanium and also titanium, aluminum, vanadium. And you can see on the graphs on the right side that we had a desorption, and some of the titanium and vanadium travels in the tissue. It means that there was a corrosion in the beginning, and then all those metallic atoms travels millimeters from the implant surface. We can explain that in some cases, and here I'm moving to biomechanics together with corrosion. You can see here that in those external connections, we always had this weak part of the implant. No, the abutment will not reach the bottom of the hole inside the implant, and you have a part where we have a very weak hole, and this is the part where the implant, the complex implant abutment, can bend, and that's why every time you see a U-shaped resorption of the bone, it's probably always or most of the time in this area, because this area is weaker than the important part of the implant and the complex abutment and the implants. So you can see here that this part is always, you can see radiographs, and if you can have some cases of peri-implantitis, just do radiographs and you will see that the bottom of the U-shaped resorption is in this area. So how it works? How does it work? The titanium oxide is a ceramic. We call that a ceramic. if you have a long bridge and you have a bending of this bridge, you will have some cracks in the ceramic. And this is exactly what happened with titanium oxide. The titanium oxide will protect titanium, but when you have occlusal forces and you have your implant bending exactly in the same part, you will have thousands of bending moments. And then for sure at the end, you will have a corrosion appears in this part. Now we have less than that with the internal connections. The internal connections, you will have a more strong interface between the implant and the abutment with a very solid connection. But even though I received those graphs from Dr. Chung showing that for sure there is a difference between an internal connection and an external connection. The internal connection is much better for sure mechanically. But I have some cases that say not much. I'm using those kind of implants since 10 years now. I have probably 2 or 3 cases where you can see the red part of this graph here. It's exactly where the abutment breaks. And when we do a measurement with the finite element to see what are the parts of the implant which are under stress, you can see the red ones. And when I analyzed those broken pieces, I can see that there is traces of corrosion. It means that before to break, there was a fatigue of the material, and then it breaks. And exactly in this part of the bone, you have bone resorption due to different chemical reactions on the top of this story. So this is a beautiful, really beautiful photo given by Dr. Dirk today, showing that when the turning of implant is not a good quality turning, when there is a lack of control of each piece of implant delivered to be used in clinic, you can easily see that those small parts, sometimes detached during the placement, especially when you have a very hard cortical bone. And you can see here more closely those traces of titanium coming from the implant surface. Those particles will for sure travel at the end in the body. And that's why we really have to watch out when using titanium implant to have a high quality implant, not only for the passivation of the surface, but also for absolutely all the steps of manufacturing. But this is my last case. I can show you that this patient have multiple fractures of abutments and then fractures of the implant. And this is very disturbing because I saw a black spot like this on his soft tissue. When I remove the implant, you can see traces of my burrs. At that time, we don't have those amazing tray fines to remove the implant. I just choose my burr to mobilize the implant to remove it. You can see that this implant was partially osseointegrated when I tried to move it. But when we did some electronic microscopy, scanning electronic microscopy, they show something like bone. You can see here that this tissue looks like bone. But when we did the light microscopy, we saw that what we thought that it's a bone is a very hard fibrous tissue. It means that there is steps before that the bone disappeared. The bone became a dense fibrous tissue. But clinically, when you open a flap and you want to regenerate, to treat the implant surface and to regenerate bone, how can you evaluate the quality of this bone? How can you know? Because we cannot see it naked eyes. We can not even smell it, or you have to remove a part and analyze it in histology to know if it's bone or if it's fibrous tissue. And then you do a proposal to your patient that you will solve the problem, you will elevate the flap, you will treat with lasers or whatever you want this surface, and you will regenerate bone. But from where the osteogenic cells will come if the surrounding bone is not bone, it's a fibrous, dense fibrous tissue. So this is sure quite disturbing. That's why you have this kind of this kind of radiograph here when you see that we regenerate bone, and after that, all this bone disappears because the osteoclastic properties in a site with problems like this will be better than the osteogenic ones. So the conclusion, I'm one more time using this if. If we are facing an existing contamination coming from the manufacturing process, there is no possibility to identify it, to evaluate its importance for your global success rate. Moreover, the most dramatic thing is that we never know and could never prove it if this contamination will not affect slowly in a long-term process of patient health. I'm sorry, I was a little bit confused I'm sure that I have fever and I'm not really well to honor this invitation in this prestigious conference. I did my best and I hope that you enjoy that, and I really hope, because here we are, I record this lecture on Tuesday, and I really hope that I can make it with you on Saturday for the discussion. Otherwise, I will ask my friend, Dr. Dirk today to take care of your question, because he's really aware of absolutely all those details I just explained. Thank you for your attention, and hope that you will enjoy this marvelous Congress, and hope to see you personally soon. Thank you so much.